The crystal stemware didn't shatter when my father-in-law called me trash. The room just went dead silent. I watched my husband stare at his plate, waiting for permission to breathe, and realized my marriage wasn't a partnership. It was a hostage situation. I didn't flip the table or scream. I simply folded my napkin, took a sip of water, and decided that if they wanted to treat me like a liability, I would become the shareholder who fired them. The place card at my seat read, Haley. It was a small error, a missing letter, a single vowel dropped from the middle of my name like a loose thread. To anyone else, it would have been a typo, a mistake by a harried event planner or a calligrapher working too late into the night. But this was the Ashford estate in Crestmont, Connecticut. In this house, napkins were folded with the precision of origami cranes, and the silver was polished until it could reflect your soul. The Ashfords did not make mistakes. They made statements. I stared at the card, running my thumb over the heavy cream cardstock. It was the third time in 2 years they had spelled it wrong. Sit down, Haley. I told myself, don't make a scene. You are lucky to be at this table. That was the refrain my husband, Grant, had gently installed in my mind like a software update. Grant was sitting to my left, adjusting his cufflinks. He looked perfect. Of course, he had the Ashford jawline, sharp enough to cut glass, and the sandy hair that seemed to style itself. He reached under the table and squeezed my knee. You look beautiful, he whispered. He meant well. He always meant well. That was Grant's tragedy and mine. He thought he was playing peacemaker, but really, he was just the velvet rope his family used to keep me in line. Thank you, I whispered back. The dining room was a cavern of mahogany and oil paintings. The portraits on the walls were all ancestors who had made fortunes in steel, shipping, and things that involved signing papers while other people bled. At the head of the table sat Conrad Ashford. My father-in-law was 68 years old, but looked 10 years younger, preserved by salt water, expensive scotch, and the total absence of a conscience. He was telling a story. Conrad was always telling a story. The problem with the American dream, Conrad said, gesturing with a fork that probably cost more than my first car, is that it confuses ambition with capability. Everyone wants a seat at the table, but not everyone knows which fork to use. A ripple of polite laughter moved through the room. There were 12 of us tonight, cousins, board members, and Vivian, my mother-in-law, who sat at the opposite end of the table looking like a porcelain doll that had been glued back together one too many times. I focused on my soup. It was a chilled cucumber bisque that tasted like grass. Take that new hire in acquisitions, Conrad continued, his eyes drifting over the guests before landing, heavy and cold. On me. Young kid, hungry, comes from nothing, scrapes his way up through state school. He thinks because he works 18 hours a day, he belongs in the boardroom. I kept my spoon steady. I knew this tone. But you can't teach instinct, Conrad said. He took a sip of wine. And you certainly can't scrub off the smell of desperation. It lingers, like cheap perfume. The woman across from me, a cousin's wife named Blythe, who had never worked a day in her life, tittered behind her hand. I looked up. Conrad was staring right at me. He was smiling, but his eyes were dead flat. It is like that raccoon we found in the pool house last summer. Conrad said, "Remember that, Grant?" It had crawled in through a vent. Clever little thing. Ate the garbage. Made a nest in the cashmere blankets. Grant shifted in his seat. "Dad," he said. "We called animal control, of course," Conrad said, ignoring his son. "The man who came to trap it said something interesting. He said you can wash a raccoon. You can put it in a silk collar, and you can feed it caviar. But the moment you turn your back, it is going to go right back to the trash. Because that is what it is. Trash." The word hung in the air, suspended above the crystal goblets and the floral arrangements. Trash. He wasn't talking about a raccoon. The room went silent. It was the kind of silence that has mass. It pressed against my eardrums. Every person at that table knew exactly what Conrad was doing. They knew I had grown up in a 2-bedroom apartment in Queens. They knew my father drove a delivery truck, and my mother cleaned houses to pay for my textbooks. They knew I had worked since I was 14. I waited. I waited for Grant to slam his hand on the table. I waited for him to say, "That is my wife you are talking about." I waited for the chair to scrape back, for the indignant shout, for the defense that is supposed to come when you promise to love and cherish someone. 1 second passed, 2 seconds, 3. Grant cleared his throat. He picked up his wine glass. He looked at the liquid, swirling it gently, refusing to meet my eyes. The silence stretched so thin it began to hum. Conrad chuckled, a low, wet sound. Anyway, the point is, we had to burn the blankets. The table erupted into laughter. It was a release of tension, a signal that the alpha male had finished his display of dominance and the pack could return to feeding. Blythe laughed the loudest, a sharp, braying sound that made my skin crawl. I didn't laugh. I didn't cry. I sat there, and I felt something inside me calcify. It was a small, distinct click, like a lock engaging. "Excuse me," I said. My voice was steady. I was proud of that. I stood up. My napkin slid from my lap to the floor. I didn't pick it up. I walked out of the dining room, my heels clicking on the parquet floor. I felt their eyes on my back, dissecting the cut of my dress, the posture of my spine, the audacity of my exit. I made it to the powder room down the hall before my hands started shaking. It was a lavish room, larger than my first kitchen, with gold fixtures and towels that felt like clouds. I turned on the cold water and let it run. I watched the water swirl down the drain. Trash. I looked at myself in the mirror. I was 33 years old. I had an MBA. I ran operations for a supply chain company that moved $40 million of inventory a year. I was good at my job. I was kind to people. I paid my taxes. And to them, I was just a raccoon in a silk collar. I splashed water on my face, careful not to ruin the makeup I had spent an hour applying so I would look acceptable for people who hated me. I dried my hands. I needed to leave. I needed to get Grant, get in the car, and drive until the air smelled like exhaust and pizza and reality. I reached for the door handle. "We have a window," a voice said from the hallway. I froze. The door to the powder room was thick, but the latch hadn't fully clicked shut. I could hear voices in the corridor. Just around the corner in the library alcove, it was Conrad, and another man, Sterling, the family attorney, a man who smiled with his teeth but never his eyes. "The post-nup enforcement window is tricky," Sterling was saying. His voice was dry, like rustling paper. "The clause on infidelity is solid, but the competency clause is subjective. If we want a clean break, we need to trigger the separation before the 5-year mark." I held my breath. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. 5 years was in 3 months. "She is not going to sign a modification," Conrad said. "The girl is stubborn. She thinks she has rights." "She does have rights, unfortunately," Sterling said, "unless we can leverage the gift tax filings, or if Grant takes the promotion." "He will take it," Conrad said. He sounded bored. "Grant does what he is told. He knows the terms. He gets the CEO seat when the divorce is finalized, or he gets nothing." I stepped back from the door. My legs felt like water. This wasn't just dislike. This wasn't just a rude dinner. This was a conspiracy. Grant gets the CEO seat when the divorce is finalized. My husband. The man who held me when I cried after my mother died. The man who swore he didn't care about the money. He knew. I didn't hear the rest. I couldn't. I waited until their footsteps faded down the hall. Then I slipped out. I walked straight to the foyer, grabbed my coat from the stunned staff member, and walked out into the cold Connecticut night. Grant came out 5 minutes later. He looked annoyed, breathless. "Haley," he said, jogging down the stone steps. "What are you doing? You can't just leave. Mom is asking if you are sick." "I am sick." I said, "I am sick of this." I got into the passenger seat of our car. I didn't look at him. Grant got in the driver's seat. He slammed the door. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. That was incredibly rude. He said, "He called me trash." "Grant, he was telling a joke. He called me trash." I repeated, "And you said nothing." Grant sighed. He started the engine. The expensive purr of the motor filled the cabin. "You are being sensitive," he said. "That is just how he talks. He's from a different generation. He didn't mean it like that. He likes you. Haley, he tests people?" "Tests people?" I laughed. It was a brittle, sharp sound. "Is that what this is? A test?" Grant pulled out of the driveway, the gravel crunching under the tires. "Look, I know he can be difficult, but you have to understand the pressure he is under. The market is volatile right now. Orpheum is dealing with—" "Things? What things?" I asked. "Just business," Grant said dismissively. "You wouldn't be interested. I run a logistics department." "Grant, I understand business. It is different," he said. "It is high-level finance. It is legacy stuff. Look, can we just get through the next few months? Please? Once I get the promotion, things will be different. We will have our own standing. We won't have to seek his approval anymore." I looked at his profile in the dim light of the dashboard. He looked so sincere. If I hadn't been standing in that bathroom 5 minutes ago, I might have believed him. Once I get the promotion, he was lying, or he was delusional, or he was just a coward who was willing to trade his wife for a corner office. "Okay," I said softly. Grant glanced at me, relieved. "Okay? Okay," I repeated. "I will endure it." I wasn't agreeing to peace. I was buying time. Monday morning felt like waking up from a fever dream. I drove my 10-year-old sedan to the industrial park where I worked. The building was a gray concrete box, and the coffee in the break room tasted like battery acid. But I loved it. I loved the noise of the forklifts. I loved the whiteboard in my office covered in shipping schedules. I loved that when I made a mistake here, I could fix it with a phone call and an apology, not a blood sacrifice. My assistant, Ben, stuck his head in my door. "Morning, boss," he said. "The shipment from Taiwan is stuck in customs." I smiled. It was the most beautiful sentence I had heard in days. "I will call the broker." I said, "Get me the manifest?" I spent the morning putting out fires. It was rhythmic, satisfying work. I was good at this. I knew how to move things from point A to point B. I knew how to negotiate. I knew how to spot a bottleneck before it became a crisis. At noon, my phone buzzed. It wasn't a text. It was a notification from my credit monitoring app. New inquiry. Hard pull. I frowned. I hadn't applied for a credit card. I hadn't bought a car. I unlocked my phone and opened the details. Inquiry by Sterling Associates Wealth Management. Sterling, the lawyer from the hallway. Why was my father-in-law's attorney running a credit check on me? I sat back in my chair. The office hummed around me. But I felt a sudden chill. A credit check meant they were looking for liabilities, debts, secrets. They were building a file. I needed to know what else was in that file. I picked up my phone and dialed Marin. Marin Pike had been my best friend since we shared a dorm room at State University. She was now a forensic accountant who saw tax codes the way Neo saw the Matrix. She answered on the second ring. "Hey," she said, "I am billing you for this time unless you have gossip. I have something better." I said, "I have a weird notification." I explained the credit pull. Marin went quiet. "That is aggressive," she said. "A hard pull requires authorization." "Did you sign anything recently? A loan application? A joint asset transfer?" "Nothing," I said. "Grant brought home some papers for the house insurance last month. But I read them. It was standard coverage. Send me your social." Marin said, "Let me look at the back end. I have access to some of the clearinghouse data." I waited. I could hear her typing furiously on the other end. "Haley," she said after a minute. Her voice had changed. It was no longer the voice of my college roommate. It was the voice of a professional looking at a crime scene. "What?" I asked. "You have gift tax filings," she said. "Significant ones. What are you talking about?" "According to the IRS logs, you have accepted 4 separate cash gifts in the last 2 years. Each one is just under the reporting threshold for the donor. But cumulatively, they are substantial. They are listed as transfers from the Ashford Family Trust to Haley Russell Ashford." I stared at the whiteboard. "I have never received a dime from them." I said, "Grant pays the mortgage, but we keep our accounts separate. I pay for my car. My clothes? My student loans? The paperwork says otherwise, Marin said. It says you received $200,000 over 24 months. $200,000. If I accepted that money, I said slowly, realizing the trap as I spoke. And we divorce. Then it looks like you have already been paid out. Marin said, or worse, if they can prove you took the money and didn't declare it on your personal returns, they have leverage, tax fraud leverage. They are setting me up. I whispered, Haley, Marin said, who signed these documents? I don't know. I said, but it wasn't me. Get copies. Marin commanded, do not ask Grant. Do not ask the lawyer. Go to the IRS portal yourself. Download everything. And Haley, yeah? Change your passwords. All of them. I didn't confront Grant that night. I didn't confront him the next night. I became a ghost in my own house. I cooked dinner. I asked about his day. I smiled when he talked about the stress of the upcoming quarterly review. I was watching him now. I watched how he unlocked his phone and turned the screen away. I watched how he took calls in the garage. I realized that my marriage had been a performance art piece, and I was the only one who didn't know the script. 2 days later, we had to attend the centerpiece of the Crestmont social calendar, the Children's Hospital Gala. I wore a dress I had bought myself, a vintage black silk column that made me feel armored. I put on the diamond earrings Grant had given me for our first anniversary, wondering if those had been purchased with gifted money too. The ballroom was a sea of tuxedos and gowns that cost more than my father's annual salary. Waiters drifted through the crowd with trays of champagne. I stuck to sparkling water. I needed a clear head. Grant abandoned me within 5 minutes to go talk to a senator. I stood near a pillar, watching the room. I felt like a spy in enemy territory. Nice structure, a voice said beside me. I turned. A man was standing there. He was tall, perhaps 40, with dark hair graying at the temples and a face that looked like it had been carved out of granite and exhaustion. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo. He was wearing a dark suit that fit him too well to be off the rack, but he wore it with a casual indifference that suggested he didn't care about the dress code. "Excuse me?" I said. "The supply chain for the shrimp?" he said, nodding at a passing waiter. "Fresh Gulf shrimp in Connecticut in November. That is a logistical nightmare. Someone overpaid for air freight." I smiled. It was a genuine smile, the first one I had felt in days. "Actually," I said, "if they used the cold chain distributor out of Boston, they could have trucked it in this morning. It is cheaper, but you risk spoilage if the reefer truck hits traffic on A95. He looked at me. His eyes were a startling, clear gray. They were intelligent eyes. They didn't scan me for jewelry or status. They scanned me for competence. "You know the I-95 corridor," he stated. "I run operations for Kincaid Logistics." I said, "I live in the I-95 corridor." "Daniel Crowley," he said, extending a hand. "Haley Russell." I said, "I didn't add Ashford." "Crowley." The name sounded familiar. "You are in private equity." I said, "You bought that failing textile mill in Georgia last year." "I did." He said, "You turned it around." I said, "Most people thought you would strip it for assets. You retooled the production line instead. Kept the workforce." He looked surprised. "You follow industrial manufacturing news?" "It is my job," I said, "and I like a good turnaround story." "It is rare. It is efficient," he corrected. "Stripping assets is lazy. Fixing the broken bones of a company is where the real value is." He took a sip of his drink. He was looking at me with a curiosity that felt dangerous. "You are too smart to be standing by this pillar alone," Daniel Crowley said. "Who are you hiding from?" I opened my mouth to answer, but a shadow fell over us. "There you are," a booming voice said. "Conrad." He materialized out of the crowd, Grant trailing behind him like a loyal spaniel. Conrad's face was flushed with wine and victory. "I see you have met the help," Conrad said to Daniel, clapping a hand on my shoulder. It was heavy and possessive. Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly. He didn't look at Conrad. He looked at me. I think we were just discussing logistics. "Haley loves to talk about trucks," Conrad said with a sneer. "It is quaint. We try to get her interested in the foundation work, but you can't take the queens out of the girl, right? He squeezed my shoulder. It hurt. This is Daniel Crowley, Conrad said to me, speaking slowly as if I were a child. He is a very important investor. Haley. Try not to bore him with shipping manifests. He turned back to Daniel, my son's wife, Grant's charity project. We call her Everyone Needs a Hobby. The air left my lungs. Charity project, in front of a stranger, in front of my husband. Grant was looking at his shoes. I looked at Daniel Crowley. I expected to see the same amusement I saw in everyone else's eyes. The shared joke. Look at the poor girl trying to play dress-up. But Daniel wasn't smiling. He was looking at Conrad with an expression of cold, clinical distaste. Actually, Daniel said, his voice quiet but perfectly audible. She was explaining the inefficiencies in cold chain distribution. It was the most intelligent conversation I have had all night. Conrad blinked. The smile faltered. Daniel turned to me. He ignored Conrad completely. It was nice to meet you, Ms. Russell. He nodded to me, turned his back on a billionaire, and walked away. Conrad stood there, his mouth slightly open. Then he laughed. A harsh barking sound. Arrogant prick. New money. He won't last. Come on. Haley, Grant said, grabbing my elbow. We need to say hello to the senator. I let them pull me away. But my heart was pounding. For the first time in years, someone had seen me. Not as a prop, not as a charity case, but as a professional. The rest of the night was a blur of fake smiles and flashing cameras. I played my part. I nodded. I didn't speak. When we finally went to the coat check to leave, the attendant handed me my wool trench coat. I slid my arms into the sleeves. I felt something crinkle in the right pocket. I frowned. I had checked my pockets before we left the house. They were empty. I waited until Grant was distracted with the valet ticket. I slipped my hand into my pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. It was heavy stock, like a business card, but blank on one side. I turned it over. There were 2 words written in a sharp, angular scrawl. Check Orpheum, Conrad's company, the empire, the source of the money, the power, the arrogance. I looked around the lobby. The crowd was thinning. Near the exit, I saw a familiar dark suit. Daniel Crowley was stepping into a waiting car. He didn't look back. I closed my hand over the note. Check Orpheum. Why? I thought about the silence at the dinner table. I thought about the gift tax filings I never signed. I thought about the credit check. I thought about Conrad calling me a charity project. They treated me like I was stupid. That was their mistake. They thought because I didn't come from money. I didn't understand how it worked. They thought because I was quiet. I was compliant. I got into the car next to Grant. He was humming along to the radio. Relieved the night was over. Relieved he hadn't upset his father. Did you have a good time? He asked. I looked at him. I really looked at him. I saw the weakness in his jaw. I saw the fear in his eyes. I saw a man who would watch me drown if his father told him the water was fine. It was educational. I said, I didn't cry on the way home. I didn't feel sick anymore. I felt cold. I felt sharp. I had spent 5 years trying to be good enough for this family. I had tried to shrink myself to fit into their world. I had begged for scraps of respect. No more. If they wanted to treat me like a hostile entity, I would become one. I touched the paper in my pocket. Check Orpheum. Tomorrow. I wouldn't just check it. I would dissect it. I looked out the window at the passing darkness of the Connecticut woods. Let's see what you are hiding. Conrad. The note from my coat pocket sat on my desk next to a cup of cold coffee. 2 words on heavy cardstock. Check Orpheum. It was Sunday morning. Grant was at the golf club, playing 18 holes with a state judge he needed to charm. The house was quiet. The kind of aggressive silence that exists in expensive homes where the carpets are too thick and the windows are triple-paned. I had told Grant I had work to catch up on. It wasn't a lie. I just didn't specify that the work was forensic archaeology of his family's empire. I opened my laptop and pulled up the public filings for Orpheum Holdings. To the outside world, Orpheum was a titan. It was a conglomerate that owned shipping fleets. commercial real estate in Manhattan, and a boutique pharmaceutical chain. It was the bedrock of the Ashford name, the reason they sat on museum boards and had wings of hospitals named after them. But as I started clicking through the SEC filings, the bedrock looked more like sand. The structure was a nightmare. Orpheum Holdings wasn't one company. It was a labyrinth of shell corporations. There was Orpheum Global, which owned Orpheum North America, which was leased to a holding company in Delaware called Acheron LLC, which in turn paid licensing fees to a subsidiary in the Cayman Islands. It was like a set of Russian nesting dolls, but every doll was hollow. I pulled up the balance sheet for the last fiscal year. Revenue was flat. That was expected for a legacy company, but the debt servicing costs were astronomical. Orpheum was bleeding cash just to pay the interest on loans that seemed to be constantly refinanced. Then I saw it, a recurring line item listed under operational advisory expenses. It was a quarterly payment of $350,000, $1.4 million a year. It was paid to an entity called the Ashford Heritage Initiative. I Googled it. The website was a single landing page with a picture of a lighthouse and a vague mission statement about preserving corporate history. No staff list. No address other than a P.O. box in Crestmont. I picked up my phone and called Marin. I am looking at a nonprofit. I said without preamble, the Ashford Heritage Initiative. Can you see who the signatories are? Give me 5 minutes, Marin said. I waited. Outside the window. The gardener was blowing leaves off the driveway. I watched him erase the mess, making the world look perfect again. That was what the Ashfords did. They erased the mess. Okay, Marin said. Coming back on the line. I am in the state registry. The Heritage Initiative is a 501c3. The registered agent is Sterling and Associates, the family lawyer. But here is the interesting part. Marin continued. The nonprofit lists 3 board members, Conrad Ashford, Vivian Ashford, and a Grant Ashford. My husband was on the board of a nonprofit that was draining over $1 million a year from the public company he worked for. Haley, Marin said, her voice dropping an octave. I am looking at the tax returns for the nonprofit. They list almost 0 charitable activities. No grants given, no scholarships. 90% of the incoming funds are paid out to a consulting firm called Vesper Management. Let me guess, I said, feeling a cold knot form in my stomach. You can't find the owner of Vesper Management. It is a blind trust. Marin confirmed. But look at the dates. When did the payments start? I looked back at the spreadsheet. The first payment to the Heritage Initiative was in March of 2015. 2015, I whispered. That was the month Conrad Ashford took over as CEO after his father passed away. He has been siphoning money since the day he got the keys. Marin said, it is a classic bleed. He moves money from the public company to the nonprofit for consulting. The nonprofit pays the shell company, and the shell company pays, well, whoever owns Vesper, Conrad. I said, it has to be Conrad. It is clumsy, Marin said. It is arrogant. He thinks no one is looking because the amounts are small compared to the total revenue. 1 million is a rounding error for Orpheum, but if you add it up over 10 years, $10 million. I said, stolen from shareholders. And here's the kicker. Marin said, Grant is listed as a board member. If this blows up, he is liable. He signed the returns. I closed my eyes. Grant, did he know? Or was he just signing what his father put in front of him? The same way he wanted me to sign tax documents I didn't understand. Haley, Marin said softly, you need to be careful. If you start pulling on this thread, the whole sweater is going to unravel. And you are wearing the sweater. I hung up. I sat in the silence of my beautiful, borrowed life. I wasn't wearing the sweater. I was the moth eating through the wool. That evening, Grant came home flushed with wind and whiskey. He kissed me on the cheek. He smelled like expensive cologne and denial. Good game? I asked. I let him win on the back 9, Grant said, loosening his tie. Judge Miller hates losing. It is an investment in the future. He poured himself a drink and leaned against the granite island in the kitchen. Speaking of the future, he said, trying to sound casual. Dad wants to finalize the family legacy plan next week, before the quarterly dinner. I paused, chopping vegetables. What is the family legacy plan? Grant? It is just an estate planning thing, he said, waving his hand, shifting some assets around for tax purposes. It protects us. Really, it ensures that when the time comes, the transition of power is smooth. Dad wants to make sure the voting shares stay in the bloodline. And what do I have to do? I asked. Just sign a spousal waiver, he said. It basically says you acknowledge the shares are mine, not marital property. It is standard. A waiver. If I signed that, I would be signing away any claim to the company. If they divorced me the next day, I would walk away with nothing but my clothes. And if I don't sign? I asked. Grant stopped drinking. He looked at me, and for a second, the mask slipped. He looked tired. Haley, don't start, he said. It is just paperwork. If you don't sign, it complicates my promotion. The board wants to see stability. They want to see that the family is aligned. So your promotion is contingent on me signing away my rights. I said, my promotion is contingent on me being CEO. Grant snapped. Which benefits you? We are a team, right? We are a team when you need a signature. I said quietly, but we weren't a team when your father called me trash. Grant slammed his glass down. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Jesus, Haley, are you going to hold on to that forever? He had too much to drink. He apologized. He didn't apologize. Grant, you apologized for him. It is the same thing, Grant shouted. Look, just read the damn papers. Or don't. But if I don't walk into that meeting next week with a signed waiver, Dad is going to lose his mind. And I am the one who has to deal with it, not you. He stormed out of the kitchen. I stood there, looking at the half-chopped carrots. My hands were steady. I went upstairs to my nightstand and took out a small, leather-bound notebook I had bought that afternoon. I clicked my pen. Date, November 12th. Event, kitchen argument. Grant said, it is just paperwork. Grant implied, if I don't sign. He faces consequences from Conrad. Fact, the waiver removes my legal claim to assets. Fact, Grant is prioritizing his father's approval over my financial security. I closed the book. I had read about this in a psychology article once. Gaslighting works because it makes you doubt your own memory. It makes you think you are the crazy one for asking questions. I wasn't crazy. I was just the only person in the house who wasn't afraid of Conrad Ashford. 2 days later, I sat in a booth at a diner halfway between my office and the city. It was a neutral ground. Plastic menus. Smell of bacon grease. No one who would recognize an Ashford. Daniel Crowley walked in at exactly 1 o'clock. He wasn't wearing a suit today. He wore a dark sweater and jeans, but he still moved with that focused, predatory grace. He saw me and slid into the booth opposite me. You found the note, he said. I did. I said, I ordered you black coffee. He looked at the steaming mug. Efficient. I like that. Why did you leave it? I asked. Because I hate bullies, Daniel said, and because I hate bad math. And Conrad Ashford is both. I took a sip of my water. I looked into the financials. I said, it is a mess. It is a Ponzi scheme with a better logo. Daniel corrected. He leaned in, lowering his voice. I have been tracking Orpheum for 6 months. I am a short seller. Haley, I make money when companies fail, and Orpheum is begging to fail. Then why hasn't it? I asked. Because of the mythology, Daniel said. The market believes the Ashford name is magic. They believe the assets are real. Conrad moves money between shells to make the quarterly earnings look stable. But it is all smoke. He is borrowing from Peter to pay Paul. And Peter is a loan shark in the Caymans. I told him about the nonprofit, the Heritage Initiative. Daniel nodded, not surprised. That is the siphon. He is pulling cash out before the collapse. He knows the ship is sinking, so he is loading the lifeboats with silver. My husband is on the board of that nonprofit. I said, Daniel looked at me. His expression softened. Just a fraction. It wasn't pity. It was a recognition of the stakes. Then your husband is the fall guy. Daniel said, I looked out the window. A truck rumbled past. "I need to see it," I said. "I need to see the inside." "You mean the headquarters?" Daniel asked. "I mean the operations," I said. "Grant has been promising me a tour of the Larkhaven office for years. I'm going to take him up on it." Daniel studied my face. "Be careful. Haley, offices like that are designed to intimidate. They are theaters. Don't look at the stage. Look at the ropes and pulleys. Look at the people in the background." "Why are you helping me?" I asked. Daniel took a sip of his coffee. He held my gaze. "Because you understood the shrimp distribution," he said, "and because when that man called you trash, you didn't look like a victim. You looked like someone who was memorizing the layout of the room for a future demolition." He slid a business card across the table. It had a personal cell number on it. "If you find something real," he said, "something actionable, call me. I can't dismantle a company on rumors. I need evidence." I took the card. "I am not trying to destroy the company. Daniel, my husband works there. Thousands of people work there." Daniel stood up. He threw a $20 bill on the table. "Sometimes. Haley, you have to burn down the house to save the neighborhood." Larkhaven, New York, was an hour north of the city, a town that Orpheum had practically built. The headquarters was a glass monolith that rose out of the suburban landscape like a jagged tooth. Grant was nervous when we walked into the lobby. He kept checking his watch. "Dad is in meetings all day," he said, guiding me past the security desk. "So we won't see him, but I can show you the trading floor and the executive suites." The lobby was impressive. 3 stories of marble and a waterfall that probably used more electricity than my entire apartment building. But as we went up the elevator, the air changed. On the trading floor, the energy wasn't the buzzy, manic hum of Wall Street. It was frantic. It was the sound of people bailing water. I saw traders yelling into phones, their ties loosened, sweat on their brows. I walked past a row of cubicles. A woman was staring at her screen, her head in her hands. Grant led me quickly toward the conference rooms. "This is where we handle the international logistics," he said, pointing to a map on the wall. I lingered. I walked over to the water cooler where a man in his 50s was filling a bottle. He looked exhausted. His badge said, "Senior Manager, Compliance." "Hi," I said. "I am Haley." He looked up, startled. He saw Grant hovering behind me and stiffened. "Mrs. Ashford, it is an honor. It looks busy today." I said, "End of quarter," he said tightly. "Always a push." Grant put a hand on my back. "We should keep moving." "Haley," I leaned in closer to the man. "Just for a second. Is it always this hard?" I asked softly. The man looked at me. He saw something in my face. Maybe the fact that I wasn't looking at him like he was furniture. He glanced at Grant, then back to me. His voice was barely a whisper. "Don't trust the story you are being told, Mrs. Ashford. The numbers change every morning." Grant steered me away before I could respond. "What was that about?" Grant asked. "Annoyed. Just being polite," I said. We took the private elevator up to the 30th floor, the executive level. Here, the carpet was deeper, the light softer. It was quiet, too quiet. "That is Dad's office," Grant said. Pointing to a set of double mahogany doors at the end of the hall, I noticed a keypad on the wall next to the doors. It wasn't a standard card swipe. It was a biometric scanner. Next to the office sat a desk manned by a woman with hair pulled back so tight it looked painful. This was grim-faced Mrs. Gable, Conrad's gatekeeper. She didn't smile when we approached. "Mr. Ashford is not to be disturbed," she said to Grant. "We are just looking around," Grant said, his voice dropping a decibel. I watched Mrs. Gable. On her desk, she had 2 landline phones. One was black, one was red. The black phone had a label, Board. The red phone had a label, Press. "Why 2 phones?" I asked. Mrs. Gable looked at me with cold, reptilian eyes. "Different lines for different priorities, Mrs. Ashford," she said. I realized then what I was looking at. Separation of information. The story you tell the board is not the story you tell the press, and neither of them is the truth. "Grant, I need to use the restroom." I said, "Down the hall, to the left." Grant said, I will wait here. I walked down the hall, but I didn't go to the restroom. I saw a door slightly ajar. It looked like a file room or a secondary office. I slipped inside. It was Grant's office, or rather, the office he used when he was at HQ. It was mostly bare. He really was a figurehead. But there was a stack of documents on the desk, the family legacy plan paperwork he had been badgering me about. I walked over to the desk. My heart was hammering in my throat. I shouldn't be doing this. I was his wife. I flipped through the pages. Waiver of spousal rights. Irrevocable transfer of voting proxy. I turned to the appendix. Schedule B. Beneficiaries. I ran my finger down the list. Grant Ashford, Conrad Ashford, and then, buried in a footnote on page 42, advisory beneficiary, Haley Russell, in the event of Grant Ashford's incapacitation or termination. Advisory rights revert to the trust, unless the beneficiary has successfully petitioned for independent oversight. I froze. Advisory beneficiary. I wasn't just a spouse, I was written into the trust as a fail-safe. If Grant was fired or incapacitated, I had a legal standing to petition for oversight. They hadn't told me that. They told me I had no rights, but the trust document itself gave me a lever, a small, hidden lever, and if I signed the waiver Grant was pushing, I would be signing away this specific right. They weren't trying to protect Grant's shares. They were trying to neutralize me. I pulled out my phone and snapped a picture of the page. Haley? I spun around. Grant was standing in the doorway. He looked confused, then suspicious. "What are you doing?" he asked. I looked at him. I didn't hide the phone. "I am reading the paperwork." "Grant, like you asked me to." He walked into the room and closed the door. "You are reading it in the dark?" I turned on the lamp. The light cast long shadows across the desk. I saw my name. Grant. I said, "I am listed as an advisory beneficiary. Why didn't you tell me?" Grant ran a hand through his hair. He looked suddenly very young and very lost. "It doesn't mean anything. Haley, it is just legal boilerplate. It means I have a voice if something happens to you." I said, "It means I am not just a guest." Grant sighed. He sat down on the edge of the desk. He looked defeated. Dad put that in there years ago. Before he knew, before he decided how things were going to go. He wants it removed. That is what the waiver does. It cleans up the text. "Cleans it up?" I asked. "Or erases me?" "Haley, please," Grant said. His voice cracked. "You don't understand the pressure he's putting on me. He told me yesterday that if I don't get this signed, if I don't get you in line, he is going to cut me out. Completely. No CEO seat, no trust fund, nothing." I looked at my husband. I saw the fear that governed his entire life. He was a 40-year-old man terrified of his father. "So you are trading me," I said. "To save your inheritance. I am trying to save us," Grant pleaded. He reached for my hand. I pulled away. "Once I am CEO, I will have the power. I will fix it. I just need you to endure this. Just for a little while. Just play the part. Be the good wife. Sign the paper. Let him win this one round." I looked at him, and I felt something snap. It wasn't a loud snap. It was the sound of a tether breaking in deep space. He was asking me to be an accomplice in my own erasure. He was asking me to trust a man who lied to me, to protect a man who hated me. I realized then that my marriage wasn't a partnership. It was a negotiation, and I was the only one at the table who didn't know the terms. I looked at the picture on my phone, the evidence of my leverage. I looked at Grant. "I will think about it." I lied. Grant exhaled, relieved. He thought he had won. He thought he had managed the asset. "Okay," he said. "Good. That is all I ask." We left the office. We drove home in silence. But as I watched the trees blur past on the highway, I wasn't thinking about being a good wife. I was thinking about the compliance manager with the tired eyes. I was thinking about the consulting fees draining the company. I was thinking about the 2 phones on Mrs. Gable's desk. Grant wanted me to protect him. Conrad wanted to destroy me. I decided. right there in the passenger seat, that I wasn't going to do either. I was going to protect myself. And if I could use my leverage, my tiny, hidden, advisory leverage, to stop the rot before it collapsed on people like that man in the hallway, then I would do that too. I touched the phone in my pocket. I wasn't going to sign the waiver. I was going to send the picture to Daniel Crowley. The negotiation was over. The takeover had begun. Elise Ward's office was not designed for comfort. It was designed for war. Located on the 42nd floor of a steel spire in Midtown Manhattan. The room smelled of espresso and expensive leather. Elise herself was a woman of sharp angles, a bob cut so precise it looked like it had been laser machined, and eyes that assessed my value in billable hours before I had even sat down. She placed the printout of the trust document on the glass desk between us. "This is a trap," Elise said. Her voice was cool, devoid of alarm. It was simply a statement of fact. "I knew it," I said, gripping the arms of my chair. "It is an elegant trap," Elise conceded. She tapped the paper with a manicured fingernail. This advisory beneficiary clause? It was likely included 10 years ago as a tax shelter. A way to distribute potential voting power across family members to avoid antitrust triggers. But now it is a liability for them. If Grant becomes incapacitated, or if he is terminated, you technically hold a voting proxy until a new trustee is appointed. "And the waiver they want me to sign?" I asked. "It strips you of that proxy," Elise said. "It also waives your right to marital assets derived from the trust. If you sign that document, Haley, you are acknowledging that 60% of your husband's net worth is not marital property if they divorce you the next day. You leave with what you came with, which, based on your financial disclosure, is a sedan and a savings account." I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. "They are preparing to cut me loose," I said. Elise leaned back. "Or they are preparing to keep you as a pet." "It doesn't matter what their intent is. What matters is the mechanics. Someone is trying to box you in. They want you compliant, silent, and legally toothless." She looked at me. "So, the question is, do you want to be a victim, or do you want to be a problem?" "I want to be a problem." I said immediately. "Good," Elise said. "Then we need to change the venue. We are not fighting a divorce case. We are fighting a corporate governance battle masked as a domestic dispute." She opened a fresh legal pad. "I need you to document everything," she instructed. "Every conversation, every email, every suspicious financial transaction. If Grant says something about his father's expectations, write it down with a timestamp. If you overhear a phone call, log it. We need to build a pattern of coercion. We need to prove that any signature you might eventually give was obtained under duress." "I can do that," I said. "And Haley?" Elise added, her eyes narrowing. "Be discreet. If Conrad Ashford finds out you have retained independent counsel, he will accelerate the timeline. He will try to force Grant to file for separation before you can secure your position." I nodded. "I understand." I left her office feeling lighter, but also terrified. I had just declared war on a billionaire, and my only army was a notebook and a gut feeling that something in the house of Ashford was rotting from the inside out. 2 days later, I met Daniel Crowley again. This time, we didn't meet at a diner. We met in a private conference room at the back of a library in Larkhaven. It was quiet, dusty, and smelled of old paper, the perfect place for a conspiracy. Daniel listened as I explained what Elise had told me. He didn't look surprised. "It tracks," Daniel said. He was wearing a gray wool sweater that made him look less like a shark and more like a professor. "Conrad is consolidating power. He knows the company is fragile. He can't afford a loose cannon in the family, especially one with potential voting rights. So what do?" I asked. Daniel placed a folder on the table. "We buy it," he said. I stared at him. "Buy what?" "The company," Daniel said calmly, "or rather, a controlling stake." I laughed. It was a nervous, incredulous sound. "Daniel, I have $12,000 in my savings account. Orpheum is valued at $2 billion. It is valued at $2 billion based on a lie." Daniel corrected. The real value, if you strip out the debt and the shell games, is significantly lower. But that is not the point. We don't need to buy the whole thing. We just need enough shares to force a governance shakeup. He opened the folder. Inside was a diagram. I have put together a consortium. Daniel explained. Myself. 2 institutional funds that are tired of Conrad's poor returns, and a distressed asset specialist. We have the capital, but we need a catalyst. We need an insider who can legitimately call for a leadership review. Me? I asked. You, Daniel said. You are a beneficiary. You have standing. If we acquire 5% of the voting stock, which is doable, given how leveraged they are, and we combine that with your potential proxy standing, we can demand an independent audit. And what happens then? Then the house of cards falls, Daniel said. The audit will expose the consulting payments. It will expose the debt. The stock price will tank. The board will panic. And in that panic, we offer them a lifeline. We offer to recapitalize the company in exchange for Conrad's resignation. It sounded clinical. It sounded like murder by spreadsheet. This feels dirty, I said quietly. It feels like I'm becoming one of them. Scheming, manipulating. Daniel leaned forward. His eyes were intense. Haley, look at me. This isn't about revenge. This isn't about hurting your feelings or your pride. This is about stopping a rot before it collapses on 5,000 employees. He tapped the table. Do you know what happens if Conrad keeps going? He asked. In 2 years, Orpheum declares bankruptcy. The pension fund gets wiped out. The workers in the logistics centers lose their jobs. The suppliers don't get paid. Conrad will walk away with his golden parachute, and the people who actually do the work will be left in the rubble. I thought about the man at the water cooler, the compliance manager with the tired eyes. We are not stealing the company, Daniel said. We are performing an emergency surgery, but to do that, we have to cut the cancer out, and the cancer is Conrad. I looked at the diagram. It was a map of a coup. Okay, I said, I am in. But we need more than just money, Daniel warned. We need proof, specific proof of malfeasance. We need the smoking gun that convinces the wavering board members to vote against him. I will find it, I promised. The search for the smoking gun started online. I spent my nights trawling through whistleblower forums. I used a VPN and a burner laptop Elise had recommended. I searched for mentions of Orpheum, Ashford, Larkhaven. Most of it was noise. Disgruntled employees complaining about cafeteria food or bad managers. But on the 4th night, I found a thread on a niche finance forum buried under the topic Creative Accounting in Legacy Firms. The post was 6 months old. The user was anonymous. Handle Ledger Ghost 88. The metrics are cooked. The post read, CEO demands 8% growth every quarter to satisfy the debt covenants. When operations can't hit the number, they pull forward revenue from the next quarter. It is a rolling loan. Eventually, you run out of future to borrow from. I scrolled down. Someone had replied, asking for proof. Ledger Ghost 88 responded, I can't post it. The raw data is on the cleanroom server. Only the CFO and the family office have access. It is air-gapped. But if you saw the real EBITDA, you would short this thing to 0. Cleanroom server. I knew what that meant. A server not connected to the internet. Physical access only. If Conrad was cooking the books to keep his loans active, that was fraud. Bank fraud. The kind of thing that sends people to federal prison. I needed to get closer to the executive floor, but I couldn't walk in there myself. I needed an ally on the inside. I thought about the tour Grant had given me. I remembered Mrs. Gable, the dragon at the gate, but I also remembered seeing someone else, a young woman, quiet, efficient, who had brought coffee into the room while Mrs. Gable was glaring at me. No one had looked at her. She was part of the furniture. I looked up the Orpheum staff directory on the public site. It took some digging, but I found her, Tessa Lynn, executive assistant 2. I engineered a meeting. I knew from Grant that the executive staff often ordered lunch from a specific high-end deli in Larkhaven. I took a day off work and sat in that deli for 4 hours, nursing a tea, waiting. At 12:15. She walked in. She looked tired. She was wearing a sensible suit and carrying 4 takeout bags. She looked like I used to look, carrying the weight of other people's expectations. I stood up as she passed my table and accidentally bumped her elbow. A napkin dispenser clattered to the floor. "Oh God, I am so sorry," I exclaimed, bending down to help her. "It is fine," she said automatically, her eyes downcast. I wasn't watching where I was going. "Tessa?" I asked, pretending to recognize her. "It is Tessa, right? From the office?" She looked up. Confused, she recognized me, but couldn't place me. "I am Haley," I said, "Grant Ashford's wife. We met briefly last week." Her face went pale. "Oh, Mrs. Ashford, I am so sorry. I didn't mean to." "Please, call me Haley," I said, smiling warmly. "And don't apologize. It was my fault. Here, let me buy you a coffee to make up for it." "I can't," she said, glancing at the door. "Mr. Ashford? Conrad, he needs his lunch at 12:30 sharp. He is a stickler for time." "Isn't he?" I said sympathetically. "My husband is the same way. It must be exhausting working on that floor." Tessa hesitated, just for a second, but in that second, I saw the cracks. "It is intense," she admitted. I lowered my voice. "Look, I know how the Ashfords can be. They expect perfection, and they don't always say thank you. If you ever need to vent to someone who isn't on the payroll." I slid a piece of paper with my personal number into her hand. "Us outsiders have to stick together," I said. She looked at the number, then she looked at me. There was a flash of something in her eyes. Resentment? Hope? "He keeps a book," she whispered. I froze. "What? Mr. Ashford," she said, her voice barely audible over the noise of the espresso machine. "He keeps a black notebook in his safe. He calls it his insurance policy. Whenever a board member disagrees with him, he opens the book. The next day, they vote his way. Leverage," I realized. "Blackmail." "Does Grant know?" I asked. She shook her head. "Only Mrs. Gable knows. And me, because I have to shred the drafts." She gripped the takeout bags tighter. "I have to go," she said. She hurried out of the deli, but she kept the piece of paper. I sat back down. My hands were shaking. Conrad wasn't just cooking the books. He was running a blackmail operation. That was how he kept the board in line. That was how he survived. I texted Daniel. "It is not just fraud. It is extortion. We need the black book." The following Saturday was the quarterly family dinner. The atmosphere was tighter than usual. The air in the dining room felt pressurized. Grant had been on edge all week, asking if I had signed the waiver yet. I kept stalling, saying I needed my lawyer to review the syntax. Conrad sat at the head of the table, looking like a king whose borders were being tested. Tonight, however, he was charming. He poured the wine himself. He told jokes that were actually funny. "I want to propose a toast," Conrad said, raising his glass. We all lifted our crystal flutes. "To loyalty," Conrad said. "In this changing world, with markets shifting and wolves at the door, loyalty is the only currency that matters. Family protects family." He looked at me. "Haley," he said warmly, "I know we have had our differences. I can be abrasive. It is the cost of doing business. But I want you to know that you are part of this circle." I forced a smile. "Thank you, Conrad." He reached under the table and pulled out a velvet box. "I saw something in town the other day, and I thought of you," he said. He slid the box across the mahogany table. Grant looked surprised. "Dad? You didn't have to." "Nonsense," Conrad said. "Open it." I opened the box. Inside lay a diamond necklace. It was stunning. A delicate chain with a pendant shaped like a teardrop, but it looked heavy. "It is beautiful," I said. "It is a singular piece." Conrad said, "It reminds me that everything has its place. A diamond is only beautiful if it is set correctly. If it is loose, it is just a rock. But in a setting, it has purpose." The subtext was subtle, but it hit me like a slap. You are the rock. I am the setting. Without me, you are nothing. Let me put it on you," Grant offered. I turned, lifting my hair. Grant fastened the clasp around my neck. The metal felt cold against my skin. "There," Conrad said, smiling with satisfaction. "Now you look like an Ashford." The dinner continued. I ate my sea bass. I drank the wine. I played the part. But the necklace felt heavier with every passing minute. It felt like a collar. When we got home, I went straight to the bathroom to take it off. I fumbled with the clasp. It was intricate, a heavy locking mechanism that felt over-engineered for a piece of jewelry. I finally got it loose. I held it up to the light. Something caught my eye. The clasp was thick, too thick. I grabbed my tweezers from the medicine cabinet. I poked at the underside of the gold latch. There was a tiny seam. I pushed. The seam gave way. Inside the hollow cavity of the clasp sat a small, black disc, no larger than a grain of rice, a tracker. I stared at it. My breath hitched in my throat. He had gifted me a surveillance device. It wasn't just about knowing where I was. It was about dominance. It was about proving that his reach extended to the very skin of my neck. I didn't flush it. I didn't smash it. I carefully put the disc back into the clasp and snapped it shut. If I destroyed it, he would know I found it. I needed him to think I was still wearing the collar. I put the necklace in my jewelry box. I would wear it when I had to, but I would never wear it when I met Daniel. I walked out into the bedroom. Grant was sitting on the bed, unbuttoning his shirt. "That was a nice gesture from Dad," Grant said. "He is really trying." "Haley?" I looked at my husband. I looked at the man who slept beside me. "Does he track your car?" "Grant?" I asked quietly. Grant looked up, confused. "What? Does your father track your movements? Does he know where you are right now?" Grant laughed nervously. "You are being paranoid. He is protective." "Sure, but he is not the CIA. He didn't know, or maybe he did, and he had accepted it as the price of admission." "I am tired," I said. I turned off the light. I lay in the dark, listening to Grant's breathing. I felt entirely alone, and for the first time, I felt unsafe in my own bedroom. The explosion happened 3 days later. I had been careless. I had left a receipt from the parking garage near Elise Ward's office in my jacket pocket. Grant, looking for keys, had found it. He was waiting for me in the kitchen when I got home from work. He held the receipt like a weapon. "Who is Elise Ward?" he asked. His voice was shaking. I put my bag down. "She is a lawyer." "Grant, I know she is a lawyer," Grant shouted. "I Googled her. She specializes in aggressive corporate divorce and asset recovery. Why are you seeing a divorce lawyer?" "Haley?" I stood my ground. "Because I need to understand my rights. Because you are asking me to sign a legal document that affects my future. And I wanted a second opinion." Grant threw the receipt on the counter. "You are building a case," he accused. "You are planning to leave me. That is why you won't sign the waiver. You are trying to leverage the trust. I am trying to protect myself." I yelled back. "Your father calls me trash. You track my credit. You put a tracker in my necklace." Grant froze. "What tracker?" I walked to the jewelry box on the dresser in the hallway, grabbed the necklace, and threw it at him. "Open the clasp." "Grant, look inside." He looked at the necklace. He fumbled with the clasp. When he saw the small black disc, his face went white. "I didn't know," he whispered. "I swear to God. Haley, I didn't know, but you aren't surprised." "Are you?" I asked. Grant sank onto a bar stool. He put his head in his hands. "He is terrified," Grant said. His voice was muffled. "He thinks you are a threat. He thinks you are going to expose the irregularities, the fraud." "Grant? The theft?" Grant looked up. His eyes were red. "It is complicated. Haley, you don't understand how much pressure he is under. The loans are coming due. If the stock drops even 10%, the banks can call the debt. He is trying to save the legacy. And where do you fit in?" I asked. Grant looked at me with a desperate, pathetic honesty. He told me if I can keep you quiet, if I can get you to sign the waiver and just be a supportive wife, He will step down next year. He will give me the CEO seat, and then I can fix it. I can pay back the loans. I can make it right, but I need to be CEO first. I stared at him. The truth was finally out. You sold me. I said, you traded my dignity for a job title. I did it for us, Grant pleaded. For our future. There is no us. Grant. I said, not anymore. I walked past him. I went upstairs and pulled a suitcase from the closet. What are you doing? Grant asked. Following me? Haley, stop. You can't leave. If you leave, he will know. He will think I lost control of you. That is exactly what happened, I said, throwing clothes into the bag. Haley, please. He will cut me off. He will destroy me. Then stand up to him, I screamed, spinning around. For once in your life, Grant, be a man. Tell him no. Tell him to go to hell. Grant stood in the doorway. He looked small. He looked like a child waiting for punishment. I can't, he whispered. Then I can't stay. I said, I zipped the bag. I am going to an apartment in Larkhaven. I said, it is furnished. I need space. You are leaving me? Grant asked. I am removing myself from the negotiation. I said, I am not your sacrifice, Grant, and I am not your leverage. I walked down the stairs. Grant didn't try to stop me. He stood at the top of the landing, watching his life fall apart, paralyzed by his father's shadow. I drove to the apartment I had rented under my maiden name. It was small, clean, and smelled of lemon polish. I sat on the beige sofa. I didn't cry. I pulled out my phone. I had a message from Tessa Lynn. He is moving the black book. He is taking it to the safe in the penthouse tomorrow. I looked at the message. I had left my marriage. I had left the safety of the status quo. I was alone, living in a rented box, with a billionaire hunting me and a husband who had folded like a cheap suit. But I felt something I hadn't felt in 5 years. I felt clean. I texted Daniel. I am out of the house. Grant knows I have counsel. The clock just sped up. Daniel replied instantly. Then we move. Get the black book. We trigger the audit on Monday. I put the phone down. Let the rumors start. Let the Crestmont social circle whisper that Haley Russell finally cracked. They were wrong. I hadn't cracked. I had just cleared the decks for battle. The war room, as Daniel called it, was actually a suite at the St. Regis in Manhattan. It was neutral ground, far from the prying eyes of Crestmont and the claustrophobic tension of Larkhaven. There were 5 of us in the room. Daniel sat at the head of the table, looking like a general reviewing a battlefield map. To his left sat Marcus Thorne, a distressed asset specialist who looked like he slept in his suit. To his right were 2 representatives from an institutional pension fund, quiet, serious men named Chen and O'Malley, who represented $300 million of capital and had zero patience for volatility. And then there was me, Haley Russell, the estranged wife, the logistics manager, the variable. We are looking at a target acquisition of 7%, Daniel said, sliding a dossier across the polished wood. With Haley's potential proxy standing, that gives us enough leverage to force a motion on the floor. But we have to move fast. If Conrad sniffs out the buy, he will trigger a poison pill or suspend trading. Marcus flipped through the file. The financials are garbage, he muttered. The debt-to-equity ratio is terrifying. Why do we want this mess? Because underneath the debt is a supply chain monopoly. I said. The room went quiet. All 4 men looked at me. I stood up and walked to the whiteboard. I didn't feel nervous. I felt like I was back in my warehouse, explaining a shipping route to a driver. Orpheum owns the shipping lanes, I said, picking up a marker. They own the mid-Atlantic distribution hubs. But here's the vulnerability. I drew a sharp line connecting the debt column to the operations column. I reviewed the supplier contracts last night. I said, specifically the ones for the pharmaceutical division. They are tied to performance covenants. Covenants? O'Malley asked, leaning forward. Standard clauses, I explained, but aggressive ones. The contracts state that Orpheum must maintain a certain liquidity ratio to guarantee delivery. If an independent audit reveals that the liquidity is fake, that it is propped up by shell company loans, the suppliers have the right to terminate immediately. And if the suppliers terminate? Daniel asked, though I knew he already knew the answer. If they terminate, I said, looking at the group, the bank loans are automatically called. It is a domino effect. One failed audit doesn't just hurt the stock price, it triggers a default on $400 million of debt within 48 hours. Marcus whistled low and long. So the company isn't just sick, it is on life support. Exactly, I said, and Conrad knows it. That is why he is selling the impossible. I pulled up a notification on my tablet. This morning, a subsidiary of Orpheum listed a prime commercial warehouse in Jersey for sale. I said, below market rate, cash only, quick close. He is liquidating assets to make payroll. Daniel realized, he is bleeding. I said, and if we don't stop him, he is going to strip the company down to the copper wiring before he lets it go. The room shifted. The atmosphere changed from predatory to urgent. This wasn't just about making money anymore. It was about salvage. If he sells that warehouse, 300 people lose their jobs. I said, and that is just the start. Daniel looked at the investors. Are we in? He asked. Chen looked at O'Malley. They nodded. We are in, Chen said. But we do this quietly. We buy in small blocks. We don't spook the prey until the trap is shut. I sat back down. My hands were trembling slightly under the table. I wasn't just a logistics manager anymore. I was a conspirator. The next day, I received a text from Tessa Lynn. Library, West Wing, reference section, 2 p.m. It was dramatic, but Tessa was terrified. I met her between the stacks of encyclopedias. She looked like she hadn't slept in a week. He is getting worse, she whispered, pretending to look at a book on avian migration. He fired the VP of marketing this morning, just screamed at him and told him to get out. Mrs. Gable is shredding documents as fast as she can. Did you find out about the black book? I asked. He moved it, Tessa said. It is in the penthouse safe now. But Haley, there is something else. She pulled a folded piece of paper from her sleeve. I saw a file on Mrs. Ashford, Tessa said. Vivian. Grant's mother? Tessa nodded. I always thought she was just passive, you know? The trophy wife who looks the other way. But I saw the monthly transfer logs. She handed me the paper. It was a copy of a bank statement. A transfer of $50,000 a month to a private medical facility in Switzerland, the Edelweiss Institute. What is this? I asked. It is for her sister, Tessa whispered. Vivian has a sister, Rose. She has been in institutional care for 30 years. Early onset dementia. Complications. It is expensive. I looked at the numbers. $50,000 a month. Conrad pays for it? I asked. The trust pays for it, Tessa corrected. But the trust is controlled by the CEO. There is a clause. Discretionary compassionate care. I felt a chill. If Vivian leaves him, I said, he stops paying. Tessa finished, and Rose gets kicked out. She has nowhere else to go. It wasn't physical abuse. It wasn't even blackmail in the traditional sense. It was a hostage situation. Conrad held Vivian's sister's life in his hands. That was why Vivian was the perfect, silent statue at the end of the table. That was why she never defended me. She couldn't afford to have a voice. Thank you. Tessa, I said, gripping her hand. This changes everything. You have to stop him. Haley, she said, her eyes filling with tears. Everyone is scared. I will, I promised. I found Vivian Ashford at the Botanical Gardens in Crestmont. It was her sanctuary, the one place she went without Conrad. She was standing in the orchid house, staring at a rare purple bloom that looked like a bruise. She looked impeccable, as always. Cashmere coat, pearls, hair sprayed into submission. Vivian, I said softly. She didn't jump. She just turned slowly. Her eyes were cool, distant. Haley, she said, I heard you moved out. The rumors are quite colorful. People are saying you have had a breakdown. Is that what Conrad is saying? I asked. Vivian turned back to the orchid. He says you are unstable. He says you are overwhelmed by the pressure of the family name. He says we should pity you. And do you believe him? Vivian touched a pedal with a gloved finger. It doesn't matter what I believe. Perception is reality in this town. I know about Rose. I said. Vivian's hand froze. The glove hovered over the flower. I know about the Edelweiss Institute. I continued. Stepping closer, I know he pays the bills, and I know he holds it over your head. Vivian turned to me. The mask dropped. For the first time, I saw the woman beneath the lacquer. She looked exhausted. She looked haunted. You shouldn't dig in places you don't understand, she said, her voice shaking. I understand that he is using your family to control you. I said, that is not marriage. Vivian, that is captivity. And what would you have me do? She hissed. Leave? If I leave, Rose is on the street in a week. Do you have $50,000 a month? Haley? Because I don't. I have clothes. I have jewelry. But I have no access to cash. He controls every cent. I am going to stop him. I said, we are going to take the company away from him. Vivian laughed. It was a bitter, jagged sound. You and who? My son? Grant can't even order dinner without checking if his father approves. Me, I said, and investors who see the truth. Vivian stared at me. She studied my face, looking for the girl she thought I was, the quiet, working-class girl who was grateful for a seat at the table. She didn't find her. He will destroy you, Vivian warned. He will strip you of your reputation. He will make you unemployable. He will turn Grant against you completely. He has already done that. I said. Vivian looked back at the flower. I tried to leave once, she said softly. 20 years ago. I met with a lawyer. Conrad found out. He didn't yell. He just sat me down and showed me a folder. Photos. Fabricated evidence of an affair. Psychiatric evaluations written by doctors I had never met. He told me he would annihilate my reputation. He said no judge would give me custody of Grant. He said I would die alone and penniless. She looked at me, her eyes wet. He owns the world. Haley, or at least, our world. Not anymore. I said, the world is changing. The numbers don't add up anymore. Vivian straightened her coat. She pulled the mask back on. You are brave, she said, or foolish. Maybe both. I said, but I am not signing the waiver, and I am not coming back. Vivian walked past me toward the exit. She paused at the door. One question. Haley. Yes? Are you willing to be hated? She asked. Because when you take down a king, the court doesn't thank you. They hate you for breaking the illusion that kept them safe. I watched her walk away. I didn't have an answer, but I knew one thing. I would rather be hated for the truth than loved for a lie. The counterattack started on a Tuesday. I was at my desk at Kincaid Logistics, reviewing a manifest, when my screen went black. Access denied. I frowned. I tried to log in again. Nothing. My office door opened. It was Sarah, the HR director. She looked uncomfortable. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Haley, can you come with me? I followed her to the conference room. My boss, Mr. Henderson, was there. He looked grim. What is going on? I asked. We have received a complaint, Sarah said, sliding a folder across the table. Multiple complaints. Actually, regarding corporate espionage and conflict of interest. I laughed. Espionage? I run the Northeast shipping lane. The complaints allege that you have been sharing proprietary pricing data with outside investors. Mr. Henderson said, specifically, a group targeting your husband's company. That is a lie. I said, my personal life has nothing to do with my work here. We have an affidavit, Sarah said. From a source within the Ashford family office, Conrad, he couldn't fire me directly, so he was poisoning the well. He was reaching into my simple, honest job and twisting it. We have to put you on administrative review. Mr. Henderson said, pending an investigation, your access is suspended. You will be on unpaid leave effective immediately. Unpaid leave. I looked at them. These were people I had worked with for 5 years. I had invited them to my wedding. You know this is fabricated. I said, you know me. We have to protect the company. Haley, Mr. Henderson said. The Ashfords are influential. We can't afford a lawsuit. I stood up. I took my badge off my belt and placed it on the table. He is terrified. I said, that is why he is doing this. I walked out of the building carrying a cardboard box with my mug and a potted succulent. I stood in the parking lot, the wind whipping my hair across my face. I had no job. I had no husband. I had a rented apartment and a war that was just getting started. My phone buzzed. It was a notification from a gossip blog one of my friends had sent me. Trouble in Paradise. Billionaire daughter-in-law. Haley Ashford, hospitalized for exhaustion? Sources say the pressure of the dynasty was too much for the working-class beauty. He was painting me as crazy. If I was crazy, my testimony about the company would be dismissed as the ramblings of a scorned, unstable woman. I drove to Elise Ward's office. I didn't cry. I was past crying. I was in the cold. Hard place where strategy lives. Elise read the gossip column and listened to my story about the job suspension. Classic Conrad. She said, isolate the target, cut off resources, destroy credibility. So what do? I asked. We stopped playing defense. Elise said. She drafted a document and printed it. We are filing for an emergency injunction. She said, we are freezing the marital assets. Not for divorce, but for protection against dissipation. We are alleging that Grant and Conrad are conspiring to defraud the marital estate by devaluing the company through illegal acts. You want to accuse them of fraud in family court? I asked. It puts it on the public record. Elise said, it forces Grant to respond. He can't hide behind his father anymore. He has to testify, under oath. She looked at me. This is the nuclear option. Haley, once we file this, there is no going back. File it. I said. That night, the rain hammered against the windows of my Larkhaven apartment. It was a bleak, relentless sound. I was sitting on the floor, organizing the financial documents Marin had sent me. When the buzzer rang, I checked the monitor. It was Grant. He was standing in the rain. No umbrella. Looking like a drowned rat. I buzzed him in. When he reached my door, he was dripping wet. His expensive coat was ruined. His hair was plastered to his forehead. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, breathing hard. Come in, I said, stepping back. He walked into the small living room. He looked around at the beige furniture, the stack of papers on the floor, the takeout container on the coffee table. So this is it, he said. This is where you live now. What do you want? Grant? I asked. I got served. He said, the injunction. My lawyers called me an hour ago. They said you are accusing me of fraud. Are you denying it? I asked. Grant wiped his face. He looked at me, and his eyes were full of a terrible, aching sadness. I didn't know about the tracker. Haley, you have to believe me. But you knew about the rest. I said, you knew about the nonprofit. You knew about the shell companies. You knew he was buying your silence. Grant sank onto the sofa. He didn't care about the wet coat ruining the upholstery. There is an agreement. He whispered, What? A private agreement, Grant said. Between me and Dad, I signed it 3 years ago. He pulled a folded, damp piece of paper from his inside pocket. It says that if I secure your signature on the spousal waiver, if I keep the voting block intact, my trust fund doubles, and I get the chairmanship when he turns 70. I stared at him. He paid you. I said, he put a bounty on my rights. Grant looked down at his hands. I was trying to outlast it. He said, I thought if I just played along, if I just kept him happy, eventually he would die, or retire, and then we would be free. I was doing it for us. Haley, I wanted us to have everything. You were doing it for yourself. Grant, I said, you wanted the money, you wanted the title, and you were willing to let him treat me like a dog to get it. Grant looked up. Tears were mixing with the rain on his face. I am a coward, he said. I know that. I have always been a coward. He broke me a long time ago. Haley, you are strong. You have always been strong. But I am just his son. He put his head in his hands and sobbed. It was a raw, ugly sound. I looked at him. I remembered the man I fell in love with, the charming, gentle man who made me laugh. I realized that man was a fiction. This was the real Grant Ashford, a broken boy in a bespoke suit. I didn't comfort him. I couldn't. I sat down in the chair opposite him. I am going to take him down. Grant, I said, with or without you. Grant looked up. He can't be beaten. Haley, he has judges. He has the press. He has debt, I said, and he has lies. And I have the truth. I leaned forward. You have a choice tonight. Grant, you can walk out that door and go back to the estate. You can stand next to him while he destroys me. You can be the loyal son who inherits a graveyard. Or, Grant asked, or you can help me. I said, help you do what? Help me prove the fraud. I said, you have access to the internal servers. You have access to the clean room. Grant's eyes widened. That is treason. He would disown me. I would lose everything. You have already lost everything. Grant, I snapped, look at you. You are 40 years old and you are afraid of your daddy. You have no wife. You have no self-respect. You have nothing but a promise on a piece of wet paper. Grant stared at me. The truth hit him like a physical blow. If you help me, I said, softening my voice, we can save the company, not the legacy, not the fortune, but the actual company, the people, the work. We can rebuild it into something honest. Grant looked at the floor. He sat there for a long time. The only sound was the rain against the glass. Finally, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a key card. It was a black card with no markings. This is for the private elevator, he said. It bypasses security. I looked at the card. And the clean room? I asked. The password changes every week, Grant said, but he keeps it written down. In the drawer of his bedside table, under the Bible. The irony wasn't lost on me. Why are you doing this? I asked. Grant stood up. He looked exhausted, but he stood a little straighter. Because you were right, he said. He called you trash, and I said nothing. He walked to the door. I am not doing this for the company. Haley, he said, and I am not doing it for the money. I am doing it because I don't want to be him. He opened the door. Be careful, he said. If he catches you, he won't just sue you, he will hurt you. I know, I said. Grant walked out into the rain. I held the black key card in my hand. It felt cold. I had the access. I had the plan. And now, I had the inside man. But as I looked at the empty doorway, I realized I hadn't won my husband back. I had just recruited a defector. I texted Daniel, I have the key. The reply came back instantly. Then we ended. Monday. I walked to the window and looked out at the lights of Larkhaven. Somewhere in that skyline, Conrad Ashford was sleeping, thinking he had won, thinking he had crushed the rebellion. He had no idea that the call was coming from inside the house. The documents Grant gave me were not physical files. They were digital ghosts, copied onto a secured drive that I brought to Elise Ward's office at 7 o'clock on a Monday morning. The city was just waking up, gray and sluggish. But inside Elise's conference room, the air was electric with the smell of blood. Elise sat with her forensic accountant, a man named Silas who spoke in murmurs. They had been reviewing the data for 3 hours. Here's the mechanism, Silas said, pointing to a projection on the wall. It was a flowchart that looked like a tangled ball of yarn. Conrad isn't just hiding losses. He is fabricating equity. Explain it to me like I don't have a finance degree. I said. Silas tapped the screen. See these inflows? 5 million here, 10 million there. They are listed on the books as capital infusions from the Ashford family office. It looks like the family is investing their own money to support the company. It reassures the lenders. It keeps the stock price stable because it signals confidence. But, I asked, but the money never stays. Silas said, it enters the accounts on Monday morning, gets counted for the liquidity ratio snapshot at noon, and then exits on Monday afternoon as management fees or consulting retainers to shell companies controlled by the same family office. It is a boomerang, Elise said. her face grim. He throws the money in to fool the auditors, takes a picture, and then pulls it right back out. It is circular financing. It is textbook fraud. And the board? I asked. Silas pulled up a board meeting minutes log. Look at the redactions. The audit committee raised questions about these transfers last year. The minutes say, discussion tabled by CEO, explanations provided in closed session. He lied to them, I said, or they let him lie. Elise corrected. Because as long as the stock price held, they all got their bonuses. But this? She tapped the hard drive. This proves he withheld material information. This proves he knowingly falsified the solvency of the company to secure loans. This is not just bad management. Haley, this is a felony. I looked at the screen. I saw numbers. But what I really saw was Conrad's arrogance. He thought he could bend math to his will. What do we do? I asked. Elise looked at me. Now we pull the trigger. We didn't go to the press. We went to the shareholders. Daniel Crowley handled the execution. His consortium, now holding just over 7% of the outstanding shares, filed a Schedule 13D with the SEC. It was a declaration of war. In the filing, we didn't just disclose the stake, we attached a letter demanding an immediate extraordinary general meeting and an independent forensic audit of the books. The reaction was immediate. Orpheum's stock dropped 12% in an hour. The market smelled smoke. My phone rang at 11 o'clock. It was a number I didn't recognize. Mrs. Ashford, a smooth female voice said, "This is Mr. Ashford's executive assistant. He would like to invite you to lunch." I looked at Daniel, who was sitting across from me in the war room. He nodded. "When?" I asked. "Today," the voice said. 12:30, at Le Jardin. He has reserved the private dining room. I will be there. I said. I hung up. "He wants to settle." Daniel said. "He is going to offer you money. He is going to offer you the moon." I stood up and smoothed my skirt. "He is not going to offer me the moon." "Daniel, he is going to offer me a cage." Elise walked over to me. She handed me a small, flat device. State law allows one-party consent for recording if you are a participant in the conversation. Elise said, "Keep this in your purse. Do not take it out. Get him to repeat the offer. Get him to threaten you. We need to prove coercion to break the prenup and the trust structures." I put the device in my bag. I felt calm. It was the icy, detached calm of a sniper. Le Jardin was the kind of restaurant where they didn't put prices on the menu because if you had to ask, you shouldn't be eating there. The private room was lined with silk wallpaper and overlooked a manicured courtyard. Conrad was already seated. He was drinking sparkling water with a slice of lime. He didn't stand up when I entered. "Haley," he said, "you look tired." I sat down opposite him. The waiter poured me water and vanished. "I am busy." "Conrad," I said, "what do you want?" Conrad smiled. It was his benevolent patriarch smile, the one he used for magazine covers. "I want to help you," he said. "You have gotten yourself involved in something very messy, my dear. These people you are working with, Crowley, the lawyers, they are using you. They smell blood in the water, and they are using you as the bait. They are asking for an audit." "Conrad," I said, "if the books are clean, you have nothing to worry about." Conrad waved his hand dismissively. "The books are complex. High finance is not like balancing a checkbook. Haley, there are nuances you don't understand, but that is not why we are here." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded document. He slid it across the table. "I have prepared a new agreement," he said. I didn't touch it. "What is it?" I asked. "It is a path back to dignity," Conrad said. "You sign the post-up. You issue a statement saying you were misled by aggressive short sellers and that you have full confidence in the company. You move back into the estate with Grant. And in exchange?" I asked. "In exchange, I deposit $5 million into an account in your name, yours alone. And I forget this little tantrum ever happened. You keep your life. You keep your status. You stop being the crazy wife who destroyed her family." I looked at the paper. $5 million. It was more money than my father would earn in 10 lifetimes. "And if I refuse?" I asked. Conrad took a sip of his water. He set the glass down gently. "Then I destroy you," he said simply. "I will drag this litigation out for 10 years. I will drain every cent you have. I will make sure Grant testifies that you are mentally unstable. I will release the medical records from your therapy sessions. Yes, I have those. I will paint you as a gold-digging paranoid who couldn't handle the pressure. You will be a pariah. Haley, you will never work in this town, or any town, again." I felt the recorder humming in my bag. "So the choice is $5 million or total destruction," I stated. "The choice is smart or stupid." Conrad corrected. I looked him in the eye. "You called me trash." "Conrad, at the dinner table. Do you remember?" Conrad sighed. He looked bored. "I was making a point about breeding. Haley, and look at you now, proving me right. You are biting the hand that feeds you. That is what scavengers do. So I am still trash." I said, "Even with $5 million. Conrad leaned forward. His eyes were cold, hard flints. "You will always be trash." "Haley," he said softly. It wasn't an insult. It was a classification. "You don't have the blood. You don't have the instinct. You are a temporary vessel for my grandchildren. Nothing more. But even trash has a price. Take the money. Go back to your husband. Be a good girl." I stared at him. I memorized the lines of his face, the arrogance, the absolute certainty that everyone and everything was for sale. I stood up. "No." I said. Conrad blinked. "Excuse me? I am not taking the money." I said, "And I'm not coming back." Conrad's face darkened. "You are making a mistake. A fatal mistake. The only mistake I made was waiting this long." I said. I walked out of the restaurant. My legs were shaking, but my head was clear. He had said it. He had threatened me. He had admitted to spying on my therapy. He had called me trash. I got into the waiting car where Elise was sitting. I handed her the bag. "Did you get it?" she asked. "I got everything." I said, "The recording didn't go to the press. It went to the judge." Elise filed it as part of an emergency motion to remove Conrad as the trustee of the family trust, citing hostility and breach of fiduciary duty. At the same time, Daniel's team released the preliminary findings of our independent analysis to the major shareholders. The dam broke on Thursday. The audit committee, terrified of liability, caved. They authorized an independent review. The auditors descended on Orpheum like locusts. By Friday afternoon, the preliminary report was leaked, irregularities confirmed, undisclosed related party transactions, liquidity overstated by 40%. The stock went into freefall, trading was halted twice, but the real blow came from the inside. I was in the war room when my phone buzzed. It was Tessa. The CFO just walked out. He is talking to the lawyers. The CFO was a man named Marcus Vane. He was a weak man. A yes man. Exactly the kind of person Conrad liked, but weak men crumble under pressure. Daniel got the call an hour later from a source at the SEC. Vane flipped. Daniel announced. Putting the phone down, he gave them the black book. The room went silent. "It is real?" Marcus Thorne asked. "It is real," Daniel said. Conrad has been keeping dossiers on the board members for 15 years. Gambling debts, affairs, hidden assets. He has been buying their votes with silence, and he has been paying them off with consulting contracts for their spouses and children. "This is RICO territory," Elise whispered. "This is a criminal enterprise. The board is going to fracture," Daniel said. "They have to. If they stick with him now, they are co-conspirators." He looked at me. "We need to push for the vote. Now, before he can regroup." But Conrad wasn't done. A wounded animal is dangerous. A wounded billionaire is catastrophic. On Saturday, the invitation for the Ashford Foundation Gala went out. It was the social event of the season, a black-tie fortress where the elite pretended the world wasn't burning. Conrad intended to stand on that stage, smile, and show the world that the Ashfords were untouchable. He expected Vivian to be there. He needed her there. The image of the united family was his last shield. I drove to the estate. The gates were open. Staff were coming and going. setting up for the crisis management meetings. I walked right up to the front door. I found Vivian in the solarium. She was staring at the rain. "He expects you to go tonight," I said. Vivian didn't turn. "He told me if I don't go. He will call the institute. He will cut off the funding for Rose. He is bluffing." "Vivian," I said. "He never bluffs," she whispered. "He is under investigation by the SEC. I said. "His accounts are being frozen. If he moves money to hurt your sister, the feds will see it. He can't touch her anymore, not without incriminating himself." Vivian turned to look at me. Her face was pale. "Are you sure?" she asked. "I am sure," I said. "Elise secured a protective order for the trust disbursements this morning. The medical payments are locked in. He can't stop them." Vivian stared at me. She breathed out, a long, shuddering breath. "He doesn't know? He's too busy trying to save his own skin to check the minor accounts." I said, "You are free." "Vivian." She looked at her hands. "I haven't been free since I was 22, she said. "Tonight," I said. "Just don't go. That is all you have to do. Stay home." Vivian looked at the rain. "He will be alone on that stage," she said. "Yes," I said. "He will be?" That night, the cameras flashed as the limousines pulled up to the gala. Conrad Ashford stepped out of his car. He adjusted his tuxedo. He smiled for the press. He turned to help his wife out of the car. But the seat was empty. The murmur went through the crowd like a wave. "Where is Vivian? Is she sick? Is it true?" Conrad stood there for a split second. His hand extended to nothing. His smile didn't waver. But his eyes went dead. He walked up the red carpet alone. It was a small gesture, a passive resistance. But in the language of their world, it was a scream. The dynasty was broken. Grant came to me the next morning. I was at the war room, drinking stale coffee. Grant walked in. He looked different. He wasn't wearing a suit. He was wearing jeans and a sweater. He looked like he had aged 10 years in a week. "I did it," he said. "Did what?" I asked. "I resigned." Grant said, "I sent the letter to the board an hour ago, and I attached a statement." He handed me a copy. I, Grant Ashford, resign effective immediately. I can no longer serve a leadership that prioritizes deception over duty. I confirmed that I was aware of irregularities, and I regret my silence. I am cooperating fully with the independent audit. He had confessed. He had fallen on his sword. "You just ended your career." I said, "I know," Grant said, but I stopped the lie. He looked at me, hoping for something. Forgiveness? Reconciliation? I looked at him. I felt a profound sadness. I didn't hate him anymore. I just didn't need him. "Thank you, Grant," I said. "That was the right thing to do. Is there any chance for us?" he asked. "After this is over?" I shook my head gently. "No, Grant. You made your choice a long time ago. You are only doing the right thing now because you have no other options." Grant nodded. He accepted it. He turned to leave. "One more thing," he said, pausing at the door. "Dad isn't stopping." "What do you mean?" "He's planning something. I heard him on the phone with a private equity firm in Dubai. Project Phoenix. He is trying to merge." "Merge?" I asked. "With who?" "I don't know," Grant said, "but he is going to issue new shares. Millions of them." Dilution. I realized, if he floods the market with new stock, our 7% stake becomes 3%. We lose our voting power. We lose the ability to force the board. He is going to burn the village to save the castle. Grant said. I turned to Daniel. "Did you hear that?" I asked. Daniel was already typing furiously. "I see it," he said. "There is a request for an emergency board meeting scheduled for tomorrow morning. Agenda item: strategic partnership and capital restructuring. He is bringing in a white knight," Marcus Thorne said. "A friendly investor who will buy a massive block of new shares, dilute us into irrelevance, and keep Conrad in power. We have to stop that meeting." Elise said, "We need an injunction." I said, "We need more than an injunction." Daniel said, "Judges are hesitant to block business decisions unless there is proof of immediate, irreparable harm. We need to block the vote itself." How? I asked. We need to own more of the company, Daniel said. Before tomorrow morning. He looked at the monitors. There's a block of shares available. Institutional holdout, the pension fund from Ohio. They have 4%. If we buy them out, we hit 11%. With 11%, we have veto power over new share issuance under the corporate charter. How much? I asked. $80 million, Daniel said. The room went silent. We don't have $80 million liquid, Marcus said. We are tapped out. I looked at the group. We were so close. We had the fraud. We had the leverage. But Conrad was going to buy his way out of it with one last dirty deal. I have the settlement offer, I said. Everyone looked at me. What? Elise asked. The offer Conrad made me at lunch. I said, $5 million. It was a verbal contract. He offered it in exchange for my silence. You rejected it, Elise said, but the offer stands as a valuation of my silence. I said. I looked at Daniel. Can we leverage against my assets? Can we leverage against the potential settlement of the divorce? It is risky. Haley, Daniel said, if we lose, if the merger goes through, you lose everything. You will be bankrupt. You will owe millions in legal fees. I thought about the man at the water cooler. I thought about Vivian in the garden. I thought about the word trash. Do it, I said. I signed the papers. I pledged my savings, my retirement, my future, and the theoretical value of a divorce settlement I hadn't even won yet. I put my name on the line next to Daniel's. We bought the block. At 4 o'clock on Monday morning, the transaction cleared. We owned 11% of Orpheum Holdings. We were the largest single voting block outside of the trust. The sun rose over Larkhaven on the day of the board meeting. The glass tower gleamed like a knife blade against the sky. I dressed in a dark blue suit. I pulled my hair back. I put on the diamond earrings Grant had given me, not out of sentiment, but as armor. I met Daniel and Elise in the lobby. Grant was not there. This wasn't his fight anymore. We walked to the elevator. Security tried to stop us. I am a shareholder, I said, holding up the certification, and I am exercising my right to attend. The guard hesitated. He looked at the paper. He looked at my face. He stepped aside. We rode the elevator to the 30th floor. The silence in the car was heavy. This was it, the climax, the moment where we either took the castle or were thrown from the ramparts. The doors opened. Mrs. Gable was at her desk. She looked at us with pure hatred. You can't go in there, she hissed. They are in session. Watch me. I said. I walked to the double mahogany doors. I didn't knock. I pushed them open. The boardroom was a long table of polished wood surrounded by 12 men and women in suits. Conrad sat at the head. He was in the middle of a speech. Essential for the survival of the firm that we approve this merger immediately. He stopped when he saw me. Haley, he said. His voice was calm, but his eyes were murderous. You are trespassing. Security. I walked into the room. Daniel and Elise flanked me. I am not trespassing. Conrad, I said, I am a majority shareholder, and so is Mr. Crowley. I threw the file on the table. It slid across the wood and hit his water glass. We own 11%, I announced, and under Article 9 of the corporate charter, any issuance of new shares that dilutes existing holdings by more than 5% requires a supermajority vote of the existing shareholders. I looked around the table. I looked at the board members. I saw fear in their faces. They knew about the black book. They knew the game was up. We vote no, I said. Conrad stood up. His face turned a violent shade of red. You are out of order, he shouted. This is a board meeting. You are nothing. You are trash. He screamed it this time. There was no sophistication left, just rage. You are trash. You are a gold-digging little whore who thinks she can walk in here and dictate terms to me. I built this. I own this. The room was deadly silent. I looked at him. I didn't flinch. You built a house of cards. Conrad, I said, and we just opened a window. I turned to the board. The merger is dead. I said, the audit is live, and we have a motion on the floor. I looked at the woman at the far end of the table, the chair of the governance committee. Motion to remove Conrad Ashford as CEO for cause. Pending the results of the criminal investigation. Conrad looked at the woman. He looked at his board. He looked for the loyalty he had bought. The woman looked down at her papers. She looked at the black book dossier that Daniel had quietly emailed to her encrypted account that morning. She looked up. Seconded. She whispered. Conrad froze. He looked around the room. One by one. The heads turned away. The king was alone. But he wasn't dead yet. He looked at me, and a smile crept onto his face. A terrible, broken smile. You think you have won, he said softly, but you don't know what you have bought. Haley, you bought the fire. I looked at him. Then I will let it burn. I said, the boardroom of Orpheum Holdings was designed to make human beings feel small. The table was a 20-foot slab of imported mahogany, and the walls were floor-to-ceiling glass that offered a panoramic view of the world we were about to rearrange. It was 8 o'clock in the morning. The room was full. 12 board members sat in their leather chairs, checking their phones, avoiding eye contact with one another. The air conditioner hummed a low, artificial note. On the far side of the room, the legal teams were assembling like armies on a ridge. My team, led by Elise Ward and Daniel Crowley, and the company council, a phalanx of men in gray suits who looked nervous. The double doors opened. Conrad Ashford entered. He didn't look like a man who had been shouted down the day before. He looked like a man who had slept well. He was wearing a navy suit that probably cost more than my college tuition, and he walked with the easy, rolling gait of a man who owns the ground beneath his feet. He carried no files. He carried no stress. He walked to the head of the table. He didn't look at the board members. He looked directly at me. I was sitting in the chair usually reserved for the CFO. My hands were folded on the table. I was wearing the same blue suit, but I felt different inside. I felt cold. Good morning, everyone, Conrad said. His voice was rich, commanding. I apologize for the theatrics yesterday. It seems my daughter-in-law is under the impression that this is a town hall meeting. He sat down. He adjusted his cufflinks. We have a busy agenda, he continued. Opening a leather folio, the merger with the Phoenix Group is the priority. I trust you have all reviewed the term sheet. It is a lifeline for this company. It secures our debt. It expands our footprint, and it silences the noise. He gestured vaguely in my direction, dismissing me as noise. I waited. Daniel nudged me under the table. Mr. Chairman, the chair of the governance committee said. Her name was Eleanor, a steel-spined woman who had been on the board for a decade. Before we discuss the merger, we need to address the motion on the floor. Conrad smiled at her. It was a terrifying smile. It didn't reach his eyes. The motion from the minority shareholder? Conrad asked. Eleanor, please, we don't govern by tantrum. We can table that until the annual meeting. We cannot table it. I said. My voice was steady. It didn't shake. I stood up. We are not a minority shareholder. Conrad, as of 4 o'clock this morning, the consortium led by myself and Daniel Crowley has successfully executed a tender offer for the Ohio Pension Fund's stake. Conrad stopped moving. His hand froze over his water glass. We now control 11% of the voting stock. I continued, we are the largest single voting bloc outside of the family trust, and under the bylaws of this company, a shareholder with more than 10% equity has the right to demand an immediate vote on leadership if there is credible evidence of malfeasance. I placed a thick binder on the table. It landed with a heavy thud. This is the evidence, I said. Conrad stared at the binder. This is illegal, he said. His voice was quieter now. You can't just buy a pension block overnight. That requires regulatory approval. It was an off-market transfer approved by the fund's emergency committee, Daniel said smoothly. It is perfectly legal, and it is done. I looked at the board members. They were watching Conrad. They were waiting to see if the king still had his sword. The audit is complete, I told them. The numbers you have been seeing for 5 years? They are fiction. The liquidity is fake. The growth is fake. The only thing real is the debt and the consulting fees paid to Conrad's shell companies. I opened the binder to page 1. $1.4 million a year to the Ashford Heritage Initiative. I read, which pays Vesper Management, which is owned by a blind trust in the Caymans. I looked at Conrad. Who owns the trust? Conrad? Conrad didn't answer. He looked at the window. The board members started flipping through their copies of the report. I saw their faces pale. They saw the emails. They saw the dates. They saw the black book dossier that we had attached as an appendix. A reminder that we knew they were compromised, but that if they voted with us, we might offer amnesty. It was a brutal calculation. Vote for him, and go to jail for fraud. Vote for me, and maybe keep your reputation. I call the question, Eleanor said. She looked at Conrad. She didn't look afraid anymore. She looked angry. Motion to remove Conrad Ashford as CEO. Effective immediately. For cause. Conrad stood up. He slammed his hand on the table. You ungrateful cowards, he shouted. I made you rich. I built this stock from nothing. You think she can run this company? She is a logistics manager. She ships boxes. He pointed a shaking finger at me. This isn't business. This is a domestic dispute. She is trying to divorce my son. So she is trying to burn down his inheritance. It is petty. It is vindictive. He looked at me, his eyes wild. Tell them, Haley. Tell them how much you want the settlement money. Tell them this is just a shakedown. I looked at him. I felt a strange sense of pity. He really believed it. He really believed that money was the only motive anyone could ever have. It is not a shakedown. Conrad, I said, it is a cleanup. I turned to the board. All in favor? Hands went up. Eleanor, the man from the audit committee, the representative from the teachers' union, even the cronies Conrad had appointed 3 years ago raised their hands, their eyes fixed on the table. Terrified of the SEC investigation that was coming, 8 votes, 9 votes, unanimous. Conrad stood there. He watched the hands go up. He watched his empire evaporate in a silent show of palms. He looked at me. The room was dead quiet. The air conditioner hummed. You did this. He whispered. I did. I said. He laughed. It was a short, sharp bark of a laugh. You think you have won, he said. You think sitting in that chair makes you one of us? He leaned over the table. He was close enough that I could smell his cologne, sandalwood and denial. You will never be one of us, he said. You can buy the shares. You can buy the building. You can buy the lawyers. But you will always be the girl from Queens who doesn't know which fork to use. You are trash. Haley, you will always be trash, even if you own the building. The word hung in the air. Trash. It was the same word he had used at the dinner table. The word that had started this war. I looked at him. I thought about getting angry. I thought about screaming. But then I looked at the nameplate on the table in front of me. It didn't say Haley. It said acting chair. I didn't need to scream. I had the gavel. I picked up the key card that lay on the table. The master executive key. Mr. Ashford. I said. My voice was cool, professional, devoid of emotion. You are terminated. I turned to the head of security, who was standing by the door. Please escort Mr. Ashford from the building. He is to remove no files, no devices, and no personal property until it has been vetted by legal. Conrad looked at the security guard, a man he had employed for 20 years. Frank? Conrad said. You can't be serious. I am sorry. Mr. Ashford, the guard said. He stepped forward. You have to go. Conrad looked at the board. He looked at the view. He looked at me one last time. There was no fear in his eyes, just a pure, distilled hatred. He straightened his jacket. You will bankrupt this company in 6 months, he predicted, and I will buy it back for pennies. He turned and walked out. I watched him go. I watched the doors close. I sat down. My legs were shaking so hard, I had to press my hands against my knees to stop them. We did it. Daniel whispered next to me. I nodded. We did it, but the silence in the room didn't feel like victory. It felt like the vacuum after an explosion. We spent the next 2 hours in emergency session. We appointed an interim CEO, a boring, safe operational expert from the outside. We drafted a press release. We called the major lenders to reassure them that the fraud was contained. At 10:30, the meeting adjourned. I stayed in the boardroom. I needed a moment to breathe. Elise walked over to me. She was holding a tablet. Her face was unreadable. "Haley," she said, "there is something you need to see." "What is it?" I asked. "Is it Conrad? Is he suing?" "No," Elise said. "It is from the data dump. The forensic team just decrypted a folder from the trust administration server." She placed the tablet in front of me. It was a memo, an internal document from the Ashford family office, dated 3 years ago. Subject: Spousal Waiver Strategy / Beneficiary Impact. To Conrad Ashford, from Sterling Associates. CC, Grant Ashford. I stared at the CC line. Grant. I read the text. As discussed. The proposed restructuring of the trust will require the removal of Haley Russell as a potential advisory beneficiary. Grant has agreed to facilitate the signature of the waiver in exchange for the accelerated vesting of his Series B units. Grant confirms he understands that the waiver will nullify her claim to the appreciation of the assets. I read it again. Grant has agreed. Grant confirms he understands. 3 years ago, Grant had told me he didn't know. He told me he was pressured recently. He told me he was trying to outlast his father. But this memo proved he had been part of the strategy since the beginning. He knew the waiver was a trap. He knew they were trying to strip me of my rights, and he had agreed to help them in exchange for accelerated vesting. Money. He had sold me out for money 3 years ago. The rain started to hit the glass windows. I looked at the gray sky. The confession he gave me in the apartment. The tears. The "I am a coward" speech. It was a performance, or maybe it was a half-truth. He was a coward, yes, but he wasn't innocent. He hadn't just turned a blind eye. He had signed the deal. I felt something break inside me. It wasn't my heart. My heart had broken weeks ago. This was the last thread of hope. The tiny, foolish hope that maybe my husband had loved me more than he loved the money. He didn't. "I am sorry," Elise said softly. "Don't be," I said. I turned off the tablet. It is better to know. At noon, I addressed the employees. We gathered in the atrium of the glass tower. 500 people stood in the lobby, looking up at the mezzanine where I stood. They looked scared. They had seen the police cars outside. They had seen the CEO escorted out. I stepped up to the microphone. I didn't have a speech prepared. I just spoke. "My name is Haley Russell." I said. I didn't use the name Ashford. "I know you are worried. I know you have heard rumors. I am here to tell you the truth." I looked at the faces in the crowd. I saw the compliance manager. I saw Tessa Lynn. I saw the people who actually did the work. "We have removed the executive leadership due to financial irregularities." I said, "The company has been managed dishonestly for a long time. That ends today." A ripple went through the crowd. "I am not here to tell you everything is fine. It is not fine. We have debt to clear. We have trust to rebuild. But we are going to do it the hard way. We are going to do it with transparency." I took a breath. Starting today, we are implementing an independent ethics review. We are establishing a hotline for reporting misconduct that goes directly to the third-party auditors, not to HR, and we are freezing all executive bonuses until the pension fund is fully solvent. There was a pause. Then, a smattering of applause started. It grew louder. It wasn't cheering. It was relief. "I am not asking for your loyalty," I said. "I am asking for your work, and in return, I promise you the truth." I stepped back. I wasn't a savior. I was just the person holding the broom. I went back to the temporary office they had set up for me. Grant was waiting in the hallway. He looked hopeful. He had heard about the vote. He probably thought his resignation had saved him. He probably thought we were on the same side now. "Haley," he said, stepping forward. "You did it. I can't believe it. He is gone." He smiled. It was a boyish, relieved smile. "We can finally breathe," he said. I looked at him. I looked at the man I had married. I pulled the tablet from my bag. I brought up the memo. I showed it to him. Grant looked at the screen. He read the date. He read his name on the CC line. The color drained from his face. Haley. Wait, he stammered. I can explain. That was just a draft. I didn't read it. I just signed what they put in front of me. You negotiated for accelerated vesting. Grant, I said, it says it right here. You traded my rights for a payout. 3 years ago. Grant reached for my hand. I stepped back. I was scared, he pleaded. I was trying to secure our future. Stop, I said. My voice was quiet, but it echoed in the hallway. Don't lie to me. Not anymore. Grant stopped. He slumped against the wall. I realized I didn't want to yell at him. I didn't want to punish him. I just wanted him gone. I don't want an apology. Grant, I said, I don't want closure. I just want the truth. And the truth is, you made a business decision. You chose the trust fund over your wife. I looked at the elevator. I won't rebuild my life on missing pieces. I said, Haley, please, he whispered. I have nothing else. Then you have what you chose. I said. I walked past him. I walked into my office and closed the door. I didn't lock it. I didn't have to. He wouldn't come in. He knew there was nothing left to say. I packed my things later that afternoon. I wasn't staying in the building. I wasn't the CEO. I was the majority shareholder, the owner. But I wasn't going to sit in Conrad's chair. I walked to the elevator, the doors opened, and Vivian Ashford stepped out. She was wearing a simple gray coat. She wasn't wearing pearls. She looked older, but she also looked lighter. Vivian, I said. Haley, she replied. She looked around the empty executive floor. She looked at the empty desk where Mrs. Gable used to guard the gate. I heard he is at the club, Vivian said. Drinking scotch, telling anyone who will listen that he was betrayed by a conspiracy. He will never admit the truth. I said, No, Vivian agreed. He won't. She looked at me. Her eyes were sharp, intelligent. Thank you, she said. It wasn't a warm thank you. It was the thank you of a soldier acknowledging a sniper who had cleared the path. The transfer came through this morning, Vivian said. The trust is under independent control. The payments for Rose are guaranteed. He can't stop them. I am glad. I said. Vivian stepped closer. She lowered her voice. But be careful. Haley. Why? I asked. He is gone. Vivian shook her head. You broke the machine, she said. But you kept the pieces. You own the company now. You have the power. She looked at the glass walls, at the view of the city below. Power doesn't forgive, she whispered. It waits. It waits for you to get tired. It waits for you to compromise. You think you are different from him, and maybe you are, today. She buttoned her coat. But Conrad started out with good intentions too. 40 years ago, he wanted to build something. She walked to the elevator. She pressed the button. Don't stay in the tower too long. Haley, she said, the air is thin up here. The doors opened. She stepped in and was gone. I walked back into the boardroom. It was empty. The cleaning crew had already removed the water glasses. The table shone under the fluorescent lights. I walked to the window. I looked down at the city of Larkhaven. I saw the cars moving like toys. I saw the river. I saw the world that Conrad Ashford had thought he owned. I held the ownership papers in my hand. 11%. Controlling interest. I had won. I had fired the billionaire. I had exposed the fraud. I had saved the company. But I had lost my husband. I had lost my innocence. I had lost the comfort of believing that the world was fair. I looked at my reflection in the glass. I looked tired. I looked sharp. I looked like a woman who knew exactly what everything cost. Was I free? Or had I just stepped into a larger, more expensive cage with a prettier view? I pressed my hand against the cold glass. I suppose I would find out. The sun began to set, turning the sky the color of a bruise. I turned my back on the view and walked out of the room, leaving the door open behind me. Thank you so much for listening to My Billionaire In-Law Called Me Trash at Dinner. So I bought his company and fired him. I hope you enjoyed Haley's journey from silence to power. I would love to know where you are listening from. Please leave a comment below and tell me your country or city. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Revenge Stories. We have many more tales of justice, karma, and taking back control coming soon. And please, share your thoughts in English in the comments. Did Grant deserve a second chance? Was Haley right to walk away? I read every comment, and I can't wait to hear what you think. Until next time.